Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our Dion Leadership webinar series today. Our topic today is our Executive Coaches Panel, and I have our CEO and founder of Dion Leadership, Steve Dion, with me today.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you everybody for taking some time out of your busy schedule to join us today for our webinar. I want to welcome our three Vicki Walker, Gail Thompson, and Kevin Taylor. Thanks for joining me. Before we get going and they all get a chance to tell you a little bit about their background and get some coaching wisdom from them as folks that are coaching, I wanted to kind of level set the expectation of this webinar. It's a little bit different format than some of the other webinars that we've done before. So today we will be I'm going to just start with just a couple minutes of doing a brief introduction of kind of the context of leadership coaching, super quick, introduce our three coaches through a question. And then I do have some prepared questions today, but I really welcome your opportunity to use the chat feature today. I know we have over 140 people, I think, signed up for this webinar. So there won't be an opportunity to kind of turn on voice, but I would love to kind of moderate the chat. And as we go through this today, to be able to, bring your questions into the room. And the goal of this webinar is to really help you understand what leadership coaching is and what coaches specifically do in the coaching process to get results in the way in which they coach. And for those of you that don't know who Dion Leadership is, or myself, I'm Steve Dion. I lead the organization here, and we've been doing leadership coaching, training, team development for many, many years. And our mission and our goal is really to help organizations create conditions where employees can start every day excited and end every day accomplished. And we believe that organizations are better when that condition happens. And all the work that we do is in and around that mission and goal in the world. And then for those of you that don't know kind of where we play, coaching is a large part of our practice. So we have a team of over 60 coaches, and I brought three of them to have you hear from them today. But we really have a strong point of view in what coaching looks like. We also kind of blend coaching in our leadership development programs. And we also, and some of the folks on this panel as well, do team development. So kind of blending coaching and team development. And then we do work in the assessment and organizational development space as well. But kind of the red thread of all that is leadership coaching. Some of the clients that we won't kind of call out names today, but some of the organizations that you will hear maybe some examples from come from these types of companies on the screen here today. And so you can see a lot of large global clients we work with, and many are in healthcare, manufacturing, and professional services. So that's kind of a general point of view of where we do leadership and executive coaching. And then just a couple minutes to kind of level set. When we talk about coaching, what do we mean in terms of our space? I just want to share a couple slides, and then again, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. So our approach on coaching is we really believe in using a cognitive behavioral learning model in coaching. And we'll talk a little bit today about how coaching is different than consulting, training, and other modalities. But really what we're looking for is to help somebody create, obviously a stronger organizational outcome, and through realizing that their behavior does that. So I'm kind of backing into this, but their behavior comes from a mindset that happens because of the situation that you have. So, the situation happens, somebody's filtering that through their mindset and then having a behavior. So we're not necessarily teaching here's the 1 to 5 step in doing this behavior. We're kind of peeling back to that mindset stage and helping somebody understand, where are you? Who are you? How do you be your authentic self? And when that mindset shifts, outcomes can shift. And what we typically find in coaching is we're coaching for a new leader assuming a new role, maybe a leader to develop a very specific strength or going to close a gap in their development area, to enhance performance in their role, maybe to reach a higher level role, or to make sure that they are even achieving expectations in their current role. And or a leader has interest in coaching in general to be able to retain somebody in an organization as a retention tool. And I'm not going to really unpack kind of process very much today, but I do want to say that our belief is, and how we approach coaching, is that there is a beginning and an end to a coaching process. We're not starting to coach somebody and coaching them for forevermore. We believe in having a coaching lane, and there's an executive coaching program, integration, targeted talent fit, and emerging leader. Sometimes we'll blend those to be a specific program to fit in a need or audience, but we're coaching somebody usually between 3 months and a year in duration, and it follows a specific process to get some specific outcomes. And this is an example of our coaching process. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but again, that there's a process around this work, that we're going to set a foundation. We're going to be clear about why we're coaching somebody. We're going to collect some data and help them understand how they're perceived and how they think themselves in terms of their mindset, and then help coach them along the way into developing new habits and behaviors and expectations through that, and have checkpoints with their boss and executive sponsor and key people that are responsible for their success in the organization, and then try to retain that over the course of time. And once somebody's completed a coaching program, we have a coaching digest that we give them 6 months worth of information to help them kind of stay focused on their new habit or behavior. So that gives you a little bit of a foundation of coaching. I really didn't want to take too much time because you're here to hear from our 3 wonderful panelists. But before I turn it over to them, I also wanted to share that recently, if you're here talking about coaching, I realize that you may be interested in this. We just did a coaching for retention webinar as part of the HRCI Alchemizing HR series. It was just in June. And as part of that, we wrote an ebook on using coaching as a retention tool. And so if you didn't see that in any of our marketing material already, Lauren's going to put in the chat a link to where you can get that ebook. So I just wanted to highlight that may be something of interest for you. And part of why we do these is really to advance our talent development community and build a stronger community of practice and provide information and awareness across the organization. Because we know that coaching works. And the other thing I wanted to share, this is our last coaching study in 2021, where we identified 163 people we coach over the past year, and we were able to survey them and get some really strong gains. So you can see on the screen here what the coachees at that moment in time, and this was last November, said in terms of what they were focusing on in terms of their leadership behaviors and the changes they were trying to make, and then also what they were trying to accomplish organizationally. And you can see on the left side, specifically, 73% of those reported overall improvement in their well-being in terms of health around stress, focus, and their ability. So I want to unpack a little bit more of that today, and wanted to share that we do this annually, and we're going to be starting again collecting data from our coaches in September, and publish another study like this in November to kind of track information. But today we get to hear from people in real time, of folks that are coaching real life executives and get real life examples. So with that, I want to share with you a little bit about Vicki Walker, Gail Thompson, and Kevin Taylor. And to do that, I'm going to take these slides off the screen here. And I want to start by asking each of our panelists to get them to know them, to get to know them a little bit better. Just give me 2 minutes of a background to let us know how you found your way into coaching, and kind of your unique perspective of coaching. And Gail, why don't we start with you?
Thank you so much, Steve. And thank you for those of you who are spending your valuable time with us this morning. For me, coaching is a wonderful growth process that brings together the outer world and what the world and the organization need from leaders today, and the inner world of who the leader wants to be and what the leader wants to contribute, and really brings them together. And for me, coming to coaching was a bit of a Goldilocks process. After business school, I spent years as a management consulting, and I felt like too much of it was trying to push people to do something that the organization wanted and needed, but they didn't necessarily. And then I trained to be a therapist, and in my therapist role, too much of it was the inside, what was going on inside, but without really a grounding in, so what's this in service of outside? So what I love about coaching, and I've been a coach now for coming up on 10 years, and had the pleasure to work with Dion Leadership for about 4 or 5 years of that, is to help leaders be their best self to serve the organization's purpose and have a positive impact on their people. And through coaching, when you can do that, they both do better, they feel better about it, and the organization benefits. So for me, it's a win-win-win, and I love doing it. So that's how I came to coaching and how I see it. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Gail. Vicki, how about you?
Great. Thanks, Steve. So after years of being in progressive human resources and labor relations roles in manufacturing and professional services environments, I finally took some of my own coaching and also the help of a great peer colleague coach of mine and yours, Steve. I finally took some of that great coaching to heart, and I followed my passion and went full-time into coaching and leadership and team development. And while I did some of that in my roles, which was probably a good 10, 15 years of it in kind of corporate America, I did that part-time in my roles. I decided it was all I wanted to do. I didn't want to have to do layoffs or firing people. I didn't want to do that part of the human resources roles. I only wanted to do the good stuff and help develop people and help them really be better at what they do. And so I decided to go all in and do executive coaching. I mostly do the executive coaching and the integration coaching and focus on that full time. And that's when I joined forces with Steve and Dion Leadership. And I've been there for about 8 years now doing it solely. And I've never looked back. And I'm lucky enough now when they do those surveys to say, what would you do if you won the lottery? And I'm one of those few people that say exactly what I'm doing right now. So it's fun whenever they ask me those things. And, maybe I would own a dog shelter. Other than that, I would do exactly what I'm doing right now. So I enjoy that question when it comes up.
Awesome. Thanks, Vicki. And then Kevin, let's get your voice in the room.
Thanks, Steve, and greetings to Gail and Vicki, my colleagues today on the panel. It's great to be with everyone. I'm a physician. I've been taking care of patients for about 30 years as an internal medicine doc. I've had leadership roles in healthcare for about 20 years, most recently at the American Medical Association, where I was working on physician satisfaction and burnout. And it was there that I was introduced to coaching. And when COVID hit, I pivoted and went on and got certified in ICF certified in coaching. My strength on the Clifton Strengths profile is learning and growth. And so needless to say, I didn't just get one certification, I got two as an ICF coach. One of them is the traditional certification in executive coaching developed by a Harvard business grad that really follows the Marshall Goldsmith models. And the other, being a clinician, was more on the behavioral side. It's a Gestalt professional leadership model of coaching that comes out of the Gestalt psychotherapy. And so I have an eclectic kind of approach, somewhat like what Gail was talking about, that I can bring to my clients, both the whole person approach, which is present base focused, as well as being able to help them when they need to navigate organizational structures and executive coaching and so forth. So I've been able to be part of Steve's group for the past few years now and enjoyed it. And I would agree with Vicki. One of the things about coaching is that it's a lifelong journey. And as somebody who loves to learn, that's just fits me perfectly. So there's always things to learn and grow and develop with to become more effective in coaching.
Thanks, Kevin. I feel so grateful to have the three of you on this panel and just to be able to work with you each and every day. When we were prepping for this, I left our prep call going, I could have spent hours with you guys. So I know we only have 45 more minutes, but I really want to dig in. And I think we'll have some really good, interesting discussion today. And as you can see, hopefully I was really intentional to curate. Every coach has a unique background and story, right? And that's part of the magic of a coachee gets to pick a coach that fits them and their situation. And when you have that chemistry of that person with their life, needs at this moment in time, that's where the magic happens. So I tried to pick three different folks that coach from three different kind of viewpoints and walks of life. And so let's start, Vicki, let's start with you. If you reflect on kind of the folks that you coached over this past year, what's one of the common challenges those leaders were facing that you identified when you entered the coaching relationship? And if it's different than in the past years, how might it be slightly different since you've been coaching for so long?
Yeah, so great question, Steve. So I tend to work with your more senior leaders. So your top executives, senior directors up through CEOs, presidents, C-suite level. And it's true what they say, it is lonely at the top. The higher up you go in an organization, the less thought partners you have. And so they truly rely on me. So whether they are just moved to a new role, moving to a new role, finding new dynamics on their teams that they want some help with, they really find it valuable to have me as a thought partner. They have less and less people to do that with, and they find that very valuable. So they use me as a coach and a thought partner on a variety of things: how to lead their teams, how to be more effective leaders, how to manage up. Even though you're at the top, you always still have someone above you, whether it's a board or someone. There's always somebody to answer to. So how to do all of that. But what's come into play, and that's still all there, what's come into play now is a bit more heaviness. You have a responsibility of almost the resiliency and well-beings of your team and your direct reports now. You have some extra burden, just kind of whether we're coming out of this pandemic or not, you have an extra weight on your shoulders of helping your people avoid burnout and how to stay resilient. And there's new challenges now of whether it's supply chain issues of getting things into your organization, or whether it is revenue cycles not looking as strong as previously projected, or whatever is going on in the organization. There are now new unexpected challenges going on. And how do you continue to motivate and reward and recognize your team and keep them with that same motivation and momentum that they had before? What's interesting that I find along with all that, the leaders forget about themselves. And so I take that to heart and I help them with that. And then they realize, oh yeah, I did kind of forget about myself. And so to help them on that same journey as well, I find is a bit unique. They did kind of, in all of this, forget about themselves while they have so many other kind of balls up in the air.
And Kevin, same question to you. Let's go around for all three and kind of get some common themes and what you're hearing from your coachees these days.
And I would agree with Vicki. I think the VUCA world that we live in, volatile, uncertain, complex, and the ambiguous pieces that we're dealing with, we're not wired as human beings to deal with uncertainty. And when we have to grapple with that on a minute-by-minute basis, our systems start to burn out. And so Vicki really hit on it, some of the real challenges that we're dealing with, particularly in healthcare and in the midst of COVID, and teams, because teams couldn't get disassembled and go virtual in healthcare. They had to be at the front lines. So how do you help manage them through this significant moment of uncertainty and volatility? And so that would be the main sense that I have as far as an relevant current affairs issue for coaches. I agree that executive presence, managing up, being able to create your power base for a lot of leaders that are starting out, they just don't have those relationships within the system that will help them to be effective. So there's just a lot of new learning for them that's helpful. That's a fairly stepwise approach to kind of guiding them down that path. But for most of them, the emotional strain is just a challenge that we all are experiencing, and needing to figure out some way of both being fully aware of that and doing the things both personally and collectively to help address those issues.
Thanks, Kevin. Gail?
I'll jump on the bandwagon as well and say that I think in the conditions that we're all living and working in, that energetic drain and strain and increased demand is the one that, if the leader isn't figuring it out for themselves, they're not being able to lead it in others. So I would say working with that is probably the key thing. And when we focus on energy as another dimension to be led and managed, we've always talked in the past about cost and time and scope. Like, we understand a little bit better about those, but I would offer that energy is the fourth dimension that we've not really focused on, that we haven't built the skills for how to manage, and that it can make all the difference. And so with my leaders, as Kevin's saying, how do we manage in uncertainty? How do we ground? How do we get clear? Because the external guidance of how to do this may not be there. So you have to find it from another place. And likewise, we all have had energetic drain from our internal critics and all that kind of stuff for forever. But now we don't have the capacity to lose that much. So working with what's the inner drain? How do you stop the drain? How do you resource the system? And then how do you use that increased energy to be more effective? And the win-win is that as they work with their own energy and can work with others' energy, they both feel better and can perform better. So it's not the either or, perform at the expense of burnout. But how do you work with energy as another dimension so that you restore energy and are able, therefore, to get better performance?
So I'm hearing a common theme around coaching about the organization's performance or that person's performance, but through the lens of how that individual is showing up every day and their level of energy, focus, not just satisfaction for having to have, a high score on it to stay there, but their ability to maybe lean into difficult, lonely conversations at the top. I want to get into that maybe a little bit later, but I see a question coming in here about this idea. I think, Kevin, you made the comment about about teams and team development and unproductive teams a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit more about kind of the challenges that organizations are having with bringing teams together?
Yeah, I think ideally we aspire to have these teams, as Amy Edmondson outlined in her book, Teaming, that have the capability of rapidly developing and deploying to address the issues and challenges within the organization. This kind of learning on the fly capability. The reality is, has been recently published in George Caceres' book on building teams that came out in December, is that type of team exists only about 20% of the time. And most of the situations we're dealing with are teams that are really dysfunctional. They can't communicate well. There's a lot of mistrust. And Caceres talks about the building blocks to creating an effective team to get to that point where you're highly functional, resilient. And he states that the foundational building block is developing competence-based trust, where everybody gets on the same page. And I know Steve and his team has these tools around developing compacts. And I found that to be helpful when you're starting to work with a team, is what are we here for? What are we trying to accomplish? Getting on the same page in terms of mission and vision, some of the logistics around meetings, how do we focus, or how do we function in meetings, some of the metrics, KPIs, and even rewards that we want to hold ourselves, that we want to have as a team. Those are foundational, as Caceres would say, in order to get to the next stage, which is where Amy Edmondson talks, which is vulnerability-based trust, the ability to create psychological safety. I think we talk a lot about psychological safety when we think about teams. I know for me, as I interview members of teams, it really gets to that point. I don't trust these folks. And what they really are saying is, I can't speak my mind and really speak my truth in this group. The frame, or the phrase that, vulnerability-based trust is being able to really have admit that you're wrong or admit your mistakes. rewarded vulnerability, creating an environment of rewarded vulnerability. And how do you do that? What are the ways in which you can start to lead that? And, I think we're all familiar with Lencioni's work, and that's his first step, actually, is creating vulnerability-based trust, and creating the dialogue amongst teams that really needs to be modeled by the leader first. And so one of the conversations I have with a lot of the leaders, who often are physicians, is they need to model this to their docs, and they need to tell their docs, because docs really do set the stage in a healthcare setting, or the culture, if you will, around this. And the docs need to be able to admit when they make mistakes. Simple as that. And if they can't do that, and if their ego is in the way, it's going to create a huge barrier for everyone else to be able to go that route. So vulnerability-based trust is crucial. That then leads to the ability to get that productive conflict, which is, again, another part of Lencioni's work. Once you're able to kind of lean in and actually disagree with each other, because you trust that you're gonna, the strength of the group is gonna hold together when you disagree, even with the leader, that productive conflict is so crucial, that then ultimately leads to the kind of team that you want. And so my experience working with teams that are far from that is that you really have to begin with transparency, with developing some skills that help, or tools that helps them come together and begin to have dialogue, this crucial conversations, free flow of dialogue, which really is happening because of some sense of safety. And so how do you do that? What are the ways in which you can do some, icebreaker type activities, that help them to share? One of the things that I like is Jonae Williams has an icebreaker she calls the Triad, where you talk about three things. What is one thing you're celebrating? What's a goal that you have for your life? And what's one thing that you're thankful for? And I found just bringing teams together and just starting with that as a starting point just got this free flow of information beginning, and a sense of a we, that then allowed them to have the strength to move forward and get into some challenging issues, looking at transparency, at their behaviors, and so forth. So that's a lot in a nutshell, but I think the role of coaching is crucial in so many different layers here, both partnering with the leader and sometimes facilitating and coaching the team. The ultimate goal, as all these folks who publish on teams, the ultimate goal is that the team is self-sufficient and a team can manage itself and coach itself. So you don't need to coach anymore. But I think we're far from that, and team leading, facilitating, coaching is so crucial in the environment that we're in now. So I'd be interested to hear what some of the other panelists have to say about that.
Well, the other part of individual coaching that sometimes turns into the coachee realizing my team's fractured is dyads as well. And maybe we can pivot to that before I get into some other areas of responsibility. Vicki, I know you've been in a lot of situations in the last couple of years where our clients have said, hey, these two people aren't getting along and they're really important, whether it's peers or something, and done some dyad coaching. So can you unpack that a little bit as kind of the fractured relationships that have happened maybe with us being in this virtual and COVID stress related world of the last couple of years?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So I also do a lot of work with teams, which is really a passion of mine. I work not only with leaders, but also leaders and their teams, kind of that sweet spot of about 12 members or less. And I do a lot of work with Lencioni's work and that vulnerability-based trust that Kevin mentioned. And I think it's kind of spawned from some of that, and also kind of some of the current times, which has been interesting. And if I think back, I was thinking back on this not too long ago. I did an internship back in college, with a mediator. And then somebody said, you should really go into this kind of work. And I thought, no, and here I am. So I actually kind of spawned into this dyad coaching, which has been very rewarding. And it's come out of a couple of different places. I think it's come out of perhaps some of my expertise in working with teams and the dynamics that we've worked through there. And it's come out of some of those independent coaching relationships that I've had, where we've really found, especially over the last few years, that some of those fractured relationships just really need kind of a third party to help bring those relationships back together. And some of it can be from the times over the past few years going totally remote. Some of those small moments that we're missing in the workplace that used to take place in the elevator, walking down the stairs, walking to and from meetings. If you think about, you get up from a meeting and you walk out with someone, you have those small moments and those small conversations. People take those for granted, but they actually made a big difference in people's relationships. You said, do you have a moment when you walked by somebody's office? And those small moments had a big impact, and they're not happening anymore. And so what's happening is relationships are getting further apart and somewhat fractured. And people don't realize, because they're small moments, when they've become farther apart, or there's a chasm there. And sometimes it takes a neutral third party or coach to help recognize where those chasms are and where those relationships have been fractured. So sometimes it's been recognized by the organization that it would be helpful to bring in a dyad coach to help bridge this relationship and bring it back to where it needs to be. Sometimes I've recognized it in coaching. Perhaps I've done a stakeholder interview and I'm working with the client that I'm coaching, and I recognize there's a disconnect in their communication or a disconnect in how they're seeing particular things. Sometimes I'll do a 360 and I realize the disconnect in the feedback. So I've identified it sometimes on my own. Sometimes the organization has identified it. Sometimes it's come up through conversation, but I'm noticing these more and more, that this dyad coaching is really a great solution to help these kind of fractured relationships that may be between two people in an organization. It could be peers, it could be, and sometimes it's even three. I've done, sometimes it's a few people. And it can be boss, subordinate, it can be peers, it can be almost any relationship in the organization.
So we're kind of hitting on this idea that a lot of these senior executives are having trouble with managing conflict in relationships, and that turns into having business problems, right? Because they're not making good decisions and people get so frustrated they leave. What exactly, though, are you doing in a coaching conversation to get somebody to do something different that creates a healthier relationship?
So a couple things, and I give them a lot of pre-work before the actual, I have one this afternoon, in fact. I will give them pre-work before the actual facilitated dialogue takes place, on empathetic listening, on giving and receiving feedback. So I will give them some pre-work to make sure that they understand how to go into this conversation the right way, how to make sure they're listening appropriately, how they're ensuring that they are giving time and space to each other to have this dialogue that they are probably not doing normally on a regular basis, how to make sure that they understand how to have that crucial conversation, how to understand that healthy conflict is actually healthy. All conflict is not bad. And so give them some of those tools to understand, and we'll do some of that right in the session of what kind of conflict is healthy, and I'll help them with those skills in that. So it's almost a combination of some of the team learning that I will do perhaps in a team workshop, combined with the actual coaching in the session. So it's almost a little bit of a hybrid that I'll do in the dyad coaching, where it has a little bit of education and learning that a workshop would bring, along with coaching in the moment while they're bringing their topics. So in the pre-work, I give them some education and learning. I give them a couple things that I want them to bring to the table for our particular meeting to talk about. And then I will coach them live in the meeting on those couple of things I wanted them to bring to the table. And there's usually a few of those type meetings to bring them closer together.
Gail or Kevin, anything else you want to add to that before we move on to the next area? Oh, I got you on mute, Gail.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, you go. Yeah.
I was just going to say that you're hearing the echoes of the energy drain because the conflicts get worse. People have less resiliency to deal with the challenges in the same old way. And so the conflict gets greater when the energy drains. So part of it is just regrounding people. So they're coming less from that protective, angry place and more from a place of possibilities. So there is the nervous system work and the energetic work that needs to take place around these relational conflicts.
I would just share, echoing with Vicki, listening and validating are the two kind of crucial ways of kind of undermining this conflict that could become dysfunctional. And it is true. I've talked with leaders and they've never heard of the fact that there's such a thing as productive conflict, or as Vicki said, healthy conflict. And so getting them to just reframe, as you indicate, Steve, their mindset, that you can lean into conflict with a goal to have the skills to be able to to listen, validate. In a sense, you speak their truth before you speak your own. Another term I like to think of is facts don't solve fights. And the typical approach for a lot of the folks I deal with, smart docs, they just throw facts. This is why I am so sticking my stake in the ground around this truth. And it creates more and more conflict. And to not begin a conversation with a statement, but actually begin with curiosity and potentially questions when you're trying to lead the team.
Gotcha. So I would offer this too, just the process alone of saying somebody agrees to step into this coaching journey, that just anybody going through that then all of a sudden starts to reshape it. And then what the coach and coachee are talking about creates somebody to have a conversation that's different than they would have had before, and create it, as you mentioned, Gail, from a, maybe a place of possibility versus I need to be right to win this, but what value could come out of this? So we're helping somebody reframe and reshape and rethink the way in which they work. And then, as Vicki mentioned, layering in some new habits and skills. So a coaching conversation is, let's practice what this conversation could look like. And maybe they start, we go, yeah, that's not going to get the result I want. What might it look like? Well, let me show you this way. Oh, is that authentic to you? Would you actually say it that way? And so it's prepping for those very important conversations. And once they've had those, then it's like, there's a confidence built in the work in which you can then move that forward to doing it again and again, is what we're trying to get in terms of accomplishment. Before we get off of this to the next thing, we did have a question specifically on what is dyad coaching and what does that consist of? So I guess I wanted to share, as we kind of unpack coaching today, in our world, at least at Dion Leadership, we really have kind of three main lanes. Either we're being asked to coach an individual, so there's individual coaching, and that's that process I shared earlier. Dyad coaching is typically a separate program where the organization says to these two people, I want you to work together with this person and get coaching. And that process usually consists of a very specific, agreement that says 3 months from now, you two need to sit in front of XYZ leader and say, this is our plan for working together. And this is the journey we went through. And then the coach, one of these three fine folks, would help work with them separately and then together to then work through, where are our styles different? What's our personality differences? Where are our clashes? What's going on in our role? And make some commitments through we kind of have a pretty, good thought map on all the different areas to kind of triage and help them dialogue so they can create a very specific plan to say, this is how we can coexist here in a healthy way for the two of them, but also for the organization. And then the third piece, which Kevin kind of mentioned, is group or team development, which is really a group coach. And that's usually a separate program where we're saying, we know we're going to bring the whole group together, and the leader might drive that process, but it's really about asking everybody on the team to get group coaching. So all three of those sort of modalities can work. Let's pivot though to another area that came up was more about the self and the person. So Gail, could you talk a little bit about, burnout is another item that we talked about. You've kind of mentioned this energy idea and specifically kind of well-being, and how do you coach for well-being for somebody who in this world where they're just like, I'm tired. Do I even want to be here and lead this large group of people? Kind of getting on a boat and sailing off sounds better and better to me each and every day. And the organization doesn't necessarily want that to happen. So if they're engaging coaching, what does it look like from a well-being burnout perspective?
Thank you, Steve. And I think we've been alluding to some of that through a lot of what we've talked about. But burnout is now being recognized as a thing. I think we're seeing more of it than we've ever seen before because of all the demands we've talked about. And a formal definition of burnout speaks to emotional exhaustion that often drives people into a sense of cynicism or disconnection, and it degrades their own sense of competence and efficacy. So it's kind of like a 1, 2, 3 hit. And so I do have a lot of leaders coming saying, I just don't feel it anymore. Like, I'm not enjoying this. I don't know what I do next. Or they're coming saying, I'm just drained and I don't have it to give. Or their organization is coming and saying, we're really worried about this person. They might burn out and we really need them not to burn out. So it's coming from different vantage points, but the challenge is the same. And I think the core of it starts with looking at the emotional drain, looking at the emotional burnout. And usually that's stuff we're doing to ourselves from the inside as a result of what's coming from the outside. And usually a lot of the burnout, you alluded in your intro slides to mindset. I find that there's usually a belief underneath their behavior that drives the drain. So sometimes it's something like, I'm not a valuable person unless I'm helping and giving to everybody else. That's a belief that will continue the drain even if you teach them skills. Until you get to that belief and say, well, where does that take you then? What's going to be your ability in the long run to serve and support people if there's none of you left? So what's a different belief that you want to come up with that allows you to continue to contribute in ways that feel really satisfying to you, but from a place where you're supported yourself? That's just an example of the kind of belief you need to get to, because you can't get to that through training or skill building alone, or you kind of need to get under what's that belief that creates the emotional drain. And when you can start to shift that, then you get less drain, you get more energy, and you can invest that back into restoring the capacity and then being able to use that energy for more and better things. So to me, the core is to get at what's the emotional drain that's usually facilitated through beliefs that the person may not even be aware of. But when we can get to that, we can staunch the drain. So that's what I would say is really critical in the midst of emotional burnout.
I find it interesting too, I have to say, that over the decades of me being in the leadership development space, years ago when a senior person came to the conclusion that they were not satisfied, they were burnt out, they were stressed out, it was sort of their problem to deal with. It's like you're in a job, you make a lot of money, deal with it. And now organizations are really stepping up to say, this is a business problem. Like, we know if we don't help in this and not just say to the person, hey, whatever, we gave you gym membership, that'll help. It's something a lot more personal and intentional now to say, part of our job is to help this person show up to be the healthiest self person, because we know if they do that, especially people in these senior roles, they're going to create value for the organization if they can do that. Other comments or thoughts? Yeah, Kevin?
Yeah, working at the AMA on burnout, one of the things that really brought my attention to the value of coaching was an article published by Dr. Derby out of Mayo Clinic that showed that coaching physician leaders actually did decrease burnout, it improved satisfaction, improved resilience. And Gail did a great job of outlining the 3 components of burnout. And it's a helpful tool as a coach just to have your clients create a 0 to 10 scale on those 3 metrics or those 3 qualities. Exhaustion, a sense of fatigue, that could be physical, emotional, spiritual fatigue, the cynicism. And one of the things that I remember years ago, we used to talk about physician leaders who mastered the art of cynicism. I mean, they could just say things that would just cut, their humor and so forth. But as I look back at it, I mean, that was a huge indicator of probably burnout, to be honest. Disenfranchisement, lack of engagement for sure in regards to their part of the organization. And then this whole inefficacy, the feeling of incompetence. And so just keeping a scale of 0 to 10 scale once a week, just assess yourself on those 3 things. And the other thing I would say is develop resilience behaviors. When you stress, you must rest. Your nervous system requires that. And how can you re-energize? What are the micro moments? In polyvagal theory, they talk about glimmers. What are the glimmers that kind of get your nervous system back in sync? Maybe it's just, walking through nature, or even looking at some flowers on your desk or something like that. Finding those things in the micro moments that help to reset always can give you some energy to get through the challenges.
Steve, I might add a little bit too. I know we talked a little bit, or you spoke to this in the recent webinar you referenced earlier too, that I do a lot of this in my coaching too with executives, is kind of recognizing when and how you need to recharge your batteries, similar to what Gail and Kevin both referenced. And what is it that really recharges your batteries? And we do some checks on how do you evaluate your energy based on what you did during the day? What does the energy level look like at night? And how do you recharge your batteries? And how do you schedule it into your calendar, just like a meeting that you can't cancel? So you put it in your calendar, it's just as important. You schedule it and you make sure that you take the time to recharge your batteries. It's so easy for people to say, yeah, the gym is what does it, and I'll get to that when I have time. And you find 3 weeks go by and you didn't make it to the gym. So I work with my clients to be able to make sure they're scheduling that time into their calendar, whether it's walking their dog, going to the gym, listening to music, gardening, whatever it is, but that they schedule it into their calendar and they can't cancel it. They can move it if absolutely necessary, but they can't cancel it. And then also talking through things about finding those opportunities to make sure that they are finding gratitude and celebrating successes, especially our hard charging senior executives. We don't take time to celebrate the successes. We're like, yep, good. Okay, we got that done. On to the next thing. And we don't really celebrate the success, even if it's a small moment of celebration, to truly acknowledge, hey, I did something good, and make sure you do that, because that helps you recharge also, and getting through those kind of small moments. And sometimes I work with my clients too, to think back, if they're in that maybe time of apathy, what was it that truly engaged you and had a passion for this career in the first place? And getting back to some of those basics of values of what was it that drove you to this career in the first place? And maybe it's so clouded over by burnout that you can't even remember what that was. And if we can get to uncover that a little bit, and maybe it's tweaked a little bit, and maybe you want to go in a different direction. Maybe you still have a passion for some of those things. It doesn't look like what you're doing today. So how might that look differently then go forward? Let's get uncovered back to where you had a passion and your values and all that. And maybe it looks slightly different, and get to that, to uncover it and get back to that. And lastly, what I'm finding really strong right now is people aren't feeling valued. They've been in such a state of doing for others for the last few years that they're now almost in that it's me time, and they're not feeling valued. And that's a really strong feeling right now out there. So how do we bring that out? And sometimes I'm bringing that out through dyad coaching. Sometimes I'm bringing that out in different ways, but people sometimes just aren't feeling valued. And so how do we bring that back out to the surface also? And we can bring that out through coaching also.
You know, in that Coaching for Retention ebook I shared earlier, one of the case studies we gave was a healthcare organization that specifically used coaching for retention, for the idea of being valued. Their lens wasn't who has a gap in performance or who, who do we want to go to the next level and maybe they're not strategic enough or they're too tactical, they're this, that, and they wanted to, it wasn't about a performance gap closing. They specifically said, we're going to put a budget to the 10 people we don't want to lose. Because they were having a lot of organizational change and mergers and things, and they knew that those folks have options to go somewhere else and be system-wide, hospital presidents or physician leaders, et cetera. And I commended them to say, a lot of organizations wouldn't do that. They would go with that. Who's the squeakiest wheel? Let's put some grease there versus this person that's already high performing. And the results, 2 years later are, first, none of those people have left the organization, which is a totally different percentage than the population within the group that didn't get coaching. And the reports were that those folks actually have done things in their senior role that were even greater for more influence across the system than they even had imagined. Just because they were strong performers doesn't mean they can't be a stronger performer. So I guess I'd also suggest that as you think about your limited, coaching budget, whether you're coaching somebody internally or whether you're hiring a firm like us to coach that person, to be careful or, kind of mindful of who's the right person. And it may not be the person that has the most fractured relationships, if you will. To that end, though, you guys all have mentioned kind of this sort of idea that the coaching relationship or the relationship that person has with the organization is important to their ability to stay, and it's very fractured. They feel kind of used up right now. What are you doing to help their leaders see that in the coaching process too, or help that person kind of work on their personal brand, or to ask, for me to be happy and successful here, I need to shape my role and work, and these are the resources that I need to find their voice. I know this wasn't on a list of questions. I just was thinking about it as we're talking here. And we have
I can share. So I use that. So as part of our coaching process, as you know, we use stakeholder interviews. And I make this very clear to my coaching client also within confidentiality bounds that I use that stakeholder interview process with my client stakeholder very strategically. So if there are opportunities where I can share opportunities with the stakeholder that would help them lead the coachee, my client, better, I will share those. And if it makes sense to do it in a stakeholder meeting, great. And I will share that openly and transparently back with my client. So there's never anything that's happening or a discussion that's taking place that is not fully transparent. If I think it makes sense to be in a three-way conversation, open and transparent, easier that way, to be with the stakeholder and my coachee and client and share that openly, I will do that as well. And those are also facilitated dialogues that take place, as you know, as part of our process in the coaching. So I take full advantage of those opportunities to any way that I can have an opportunity to coach up, to share information, anything that will help make my coachee client more successful, I will take those opportunities, and I do. And sometimes it's interesting. I find I may share a little nugget with a stakeholder and think, well, I'm not quite sure if he's going to take that or not. And then I hear within a couple of weeks, do you know what so-and-so did in this team meeting kind of thing? And I'm like, they do listen. So that's good. So whenever I can have those opportunities to help influence, I will take them.
You know, a lot of times I think we're being asked to coach a person because maybe their leader is not as engaged and developing that person as need be. So there's a lap over effect, if you will, for the others that are involved in the process to realize how important it is to have good leadership practices in the relationships they have with everybody.
If I can influence there, I will.
Yeah. I also want to ask, for those of on the call, I get a sense that those on the call are resonating to this idea that coaching for satisfaction, engagement, less burnout, finding voice, all that is valuable. How did they, what tip would you give or example you might give to an organization that's trying to sell to their senior leaders why we should invest in this person? Like, what's an example of an organizational outcome that says, if this senior leader who owns a lot of budget decisions, people responsibilities, et cetera, if they can have themselves be that appropriately, authentic, energized, motivated self, what comes of that? That's the benefit of the organization for investing in the coaching dollars. Gail?
That from a culture and energetic standpoint, if the leaders aren't modeling it, it's not going to be there. So if you really want a culture that values your people, you have to have leaders who are embodying being valued and valuing. So I think one of the biggest spin-offs that I'm seeing in some of those retention clients you're talking about is that as they evolve themselves as a leader, the ripple effect through the organization is huge on all the people that they manage and all the people that they influence. When they're doing that from a grounded, calm, open, appreciative place, the multiplier effect for the culture and the organization is really very large. So to think about coaching as a strategic resource in engagement, in culture change, in modeling what you want to have there up and down, if your leaders aren't doing it, it's not going to happen. It's not about words, it's about embodiment. So that's a reason to invest in your leaders and some of your best leaders so they in turn, and the more it's sandwiched with, here's what we're shooting for as an organization, in your coaching, how can you align, support, and enhance that?
Kevin, Ben, Vicky, and then we'll wrap up from here. You guys, we got 3 minutes left. So, and while we finish this last question, I'm going to put on the slide I'm going to put the next 2 webinars we're doing so people can see that as we're closing up. But please keep going, Kevin.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I find when I'm working with new leaders, especially in healthcare, they don't realize that their success is going to have to be realized through others, and their ability to lead or to influence others in accomplishing their outcomes of the organization is how they become successful as a leader. And this hierarchical kind of command control structure, which is so much what we're familiar with as we grew up in our organizations, especially in healthcare, needs to evolve into more of a horizontal structure. And that, especially with COVID, it became so relevant. That leader needs to be out in the front lines. That leader needs to be visible. That leader needs to be able to be humble and ask questions and be curious. And training and helping and coaching them in those ways so that the team and the people in the front lines feel as though that they're all a we, that we're part of this together, and to know that that leader has got their back. So I find that to be helpful skills that you could even shadow them in the experience, in that whole exercise as they get out and engage.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. And you want to close this up, Vicky, with your kind of answer to that? And then I'll just do a quick wrap up and we'll get us out of here on time.
Sure. I think the real importance for coaching is that it needs to be positioned as a benefit, as a perk. So I liken it to, and how I discuss it with all of my potential future clients when I'm doing chemistry calls, is I position it, and these are the clients that I take. Think of yourself as a great professional athlete. You're already really good at what you do. So think of those great professional athletes. They too have coaches and trainers to be even better at what they do. Those are the clients that I want to work with. Those are the same as the professional coach, the professional athletes who are already really good at what they do. They get a coach, they get a trainer to help them be even better at their game. Those should be the people in the work environment that are getting the coaches, so that it's positioned the right way, that those should be the ones getting the coaches. It'll be seen then as a benefit and a perk to make the really good ones even better.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the three of you. I had a whole bunch more questions that we're not going to get to. We can cover those next round. I really wanted to, I guess, to say that you guys are all phenomenal coaches, and I hope everybody sees that, and the work that you do every day and the difference that you make in this coaching world. I put on the slide our next couple webinars, some different topics, one different, one the same. So the next Dion webinar is September 13th, and we're going to be talking about a partnership we have with a listening tool to talk about differences in listening, which, you know, if you can imagine, in coaching is really important as well. And Terry Schell, who's a Dion team member, our practice leader of learning development, will be joining that with Allison O'Brien, who comes from Echo Listening. And then secondarily, kind of as a follow-up to that webinar and the ebook I sent earlier, I'm doing a second HRCI talk, and it'll be on August 11th. I don't even think they've put up the link yet, but it's on using group coaching as an application. So we talked a little bit about team development and team coaching. We didn't even get into group coaching and teaching advanced leaders coaching skills so they can coach each other as peers. So if that's of interest to you, please join. You can see that social media feed. That'll be on August 11th. Thank you so much for taking an hour today. I hope this was inspiring and helping you develop better organizations. And we're just grateful that you wanted to spend some time with us today. Thanks again, Vicki, Gail, and Kevin. Bye.